Okay, all right. Good morning, Alex. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what you do for Uber?
Sure. So I head up several teams at Uber. One of them is paid search, obviously. SEO is another, ASO, and we have the YouTube team that kind of does content, all kinds of content as well, and the experimentation team.
Great. Can you just take us through, to start, like Uber's full product lineup of offerings these days, like, and what your responsibility is with these products?
Yeah, so our teams are definitely in charge primarily on in acquisition, so that's kind of our main goal. We do that across all of our products, starting with, obviously our core products like the rider and the driver apps, and then going into more of the Uber Eats and some other products like we have Uber Freight, a lot of really upcoming, really cool products that I can't really talk about as much, but there's definitely a lot of interesting things that we're starting to work on already, even from a marketing perspective.
Can you explain for the uninitiated, like what Uber Freight is, for example?
Sure. So Uber Freight is primarily kind of a similar thing that we do with our riders and drivers, except this is with truck drivers. And for example, if a semi-truck is coming back after dropping off, one of their shipments, and they have room in their truck, we will help them optimize their routes and tell them, hey, there's actually on your way back, there is someone that needs some of their shipments to be taken to a different destination, which is right on your way as well, right? So we help them maximize the space within their truck and kind of get them better routes and.
Wow.
Yeah.
Using AI, right? I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. So tell us about the goal of Uber's digital marketing. Is it all direct response and app installs, or tell us about the kind of scope that you are overseeing?
Yeah. So obviously, app installs are a pretty big part of our program.
Sure.
But we also do a lot of branding, especially kind of in the last couple of months. We've been getting a lot more into caring more about our brand vision and how the audiences perceive us, and really kind of understanding that the funnels are very complex, especially as you look at drivers, for example. It's pretty easy to get a person to install the app and take a ride with Uber. It's a different story when you're trying to convince someone to actually drive for Uber, right? And especially as you get into the different types of audiences, right? Different people have different issues or different visions in terms of what they expect from driving for Uber. So that's kind of where it gets really interesting for us and how we adapt to the different audiences.
But you're launching more brand campaigns, what you mentioned. So can you give us an example and what your goal is, what your responsibility is with those brand campaigns?
Yeah. I think so. YouTube is a big platform for us in terms of branding. We've been doing a lot in there and kind of learning a lot about how video content is very specific with YouTube. And we are even starting to look at the next year in terms of kind of how do we want to create YouTube-specific content, and do we create the YouTube-specific content, right? So for example, we have a movie festival that we just launched, and we already have our 12 finalists who are working on their movies. They're like 90 seconds long, but that's part of our branding, right? Where they're actually able to create this content that's really uncensored in its way, and it's created by the audience for the audience. So that's kind of one of the exciting things. We do a lot of partnerships, obviously. I'm sure you've noticed with NFL lately, with NBA. So a lot of cool things to come. Obviously, Bose, she joined our team and she's amazing at what she does. So she's kind of obviously looking to grow a lot of those partnerships and our exposure within the normal world of consumers.
Yeah, brave new world for you guys.
Yeah.
So how does Uber tie its data sources together for marketing? If you could take us through sort of what that looks like and talk about the most important data sources for you and what's done in-house versus with third parties.
Yeah, obviously we have a lot of data, right? So we go anywhere from, we collect all the trip data, and there's a lot of really cool insights that we gathered from that, right? In terms of, we know who are the local people, we know who are the tourists, what are the most popular destinations for tourists or for locals during certain hours, right? We can even tie to a point different flights that come in at the airport, right? So there's a lot of really cool data. It's really about, like you said, it's really about tying it together and understanding which data is important and has statistical significance behind it. Because in the end, you can having too much data sometimes is dangerous because you get too excited and you start slicing and dicing in very granular ways.
Right.
And you kind of get to a creepy factor at some point, right? Where it's like, hey, Jeff, we know you want an Uber in 1 hour, right? We don't want to do that.
We know you're not at home and you need to get back somehow.
Right.
What about, we talk a little bit about audience layering and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, so on the audience layering side is obviously, again, having all this data helps us quite a bit. And it's really, having that balance in terms of understanding what is too granular of an audience and understanding what are the actual common traits between the different audiences, right?
Yeah. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, it's a good question. We find it primarily because, so we see where, again, personalization aspect of it, we don't want to get into a too weird situation with personalization, but then at the same time, we don't want to cut audiences where the traffic is not significant enough for us to, scalably optimize across. We have a lot of markets and a lot of countries that we're in. So obviously, if we started, really segmenting into a very particular, very niche audience, then just optimizing that on a daily basis would be not scalable at all, right?
Right. Talk about improving relevancy for your campaigns. Can you give us like a good example there of how you do that?
Yeah. So improving relevancy, that's always been a tough one for us because being obviously someone that's outside of a category is someone being kind of a disruptor of all kinds of industries. It's always tough for us to come into auctions with an alternative product and not really a product that's, I'll give an example as a car rentals industry, right? It's very hard for us to run ads against car rental keywords because search engines are not sophisticated enough at this point to understand that we are an alternative service to it, and we should have as high of a quality score. We should have, we shouldn't be penalized right off the bat that we're not a car rental company. So it's been, so that's been a very interesting challenge for us in kind of understanding that. But the point that we got to is more that we don't really care about the relevancy and the click-through rates as much anymore, and really balancing out the hit we take in the quality score and the actual LTV of the user. So understanding that sometimes it's better to get fewer clicks and our relevancy being lower, but in the end we're actually driving very high value users that have much higher LTV, right?
Right on. So you wanted to talk about the App Store, right, and some of your work with the Apple App Store and Google Play. And so tell us about sort of how you're driving installs through those platforms, and also, if you would, tell us how Uber kind of sends sort of rideshare users, which you have sort of lots and lots and lots of those, to your newer products.
Yeah. So obviously, the App Store is quite important to us, having being primarily an app company. It's obviously the last step of the conversion funnel. So we do a lot of optimizations within the App Store, right? So we use a lot of the experimentation tools actually given to us by Google Play and Apple themselves. But we also do a lot of third-party experimentation where we actually create a page that looks exactly like the App Store page, and we tweak elements on it in order to actually see what each element, how much of incremental installs it would bring to us, right? And a lot of them are, you would be surprised, little things like, changing, adding a grid to our hero image, just a grid that looks like streets, for example, just that, the incrementality in that was like insane in terms of installs, yeah. Wow. So it's quite interesting to see how fragile that ecosystem is. And users are very, very sensitive to any change in the App Store, especially on the app page itself. That's where the screenshots play a very big role, right? What kind of images do you put in there? Do you really keep it just screenshots of the actual application? Do you try to sell the features within the app, right? All of those things make such a big difference. And that's what we're constantly testing. What is the best image to put in? What is the best color to use? And we test it in all the different countries on a regular basis.
So for anyone trying to drive installs in the audience, any brands out there that are trying to do that, what kind of advice would you have for them in terms of the app stores?
Yeah, I would say definitely App Store optimization in terms of the experimentation piece of it, because the App Store optimization is in itself is pretty basic, coming from it's like SEO from 1990s, right? It's just really kind of updating your descriptions, making sure your keyword stuffing is there. But in the end, it's like the experimentation on the App Store page, that's really key, and I think a lot of people are actually overlooking that and not understanding this is exactly like having a landing page that you haven't optimized, right? And you're just leaving it there, but this is the last most important step in your conversion funnel before a person commits to installing your app and keeping it, right?
Right.
So that my advice would be definitely to keep a closer eye to the experimentation side of App Store optimization.
And could you walk us through like a hypothetical example of driving like a user, like a rideshare user to one of the newer services that you are, one of the newer apps that you're serving up on the app stores?
Yeah, obviously with more services that we're coming out with, we're seeing a lot of common traits, right? So for example, we know that someone who's using Uber, right, they would be actually much more likely to convert to Uber Eats because they already have that trust with our brand. They're a loyal user. So we do a lot of splitting of the audiences in a way where we try to figure out, okay, who will benefit more from this, from appearing for this? Because obviously having all these brands coming into the same auction will just cause us to bid against ourselves. And that's not really efficient for the company as a whole. So what we do is we try to split the audiences based on who would benefit the most out of this audience. And then in the App Store, for example, that's where we have that ad spot, right? That's like kind of mandatory. And obviously we don't want anyone appearing there before, especially in the first position above our app. So we will insert some of our other brands in there to take that position. So like, for example, someone's searching for Uber, we will insert Uber Eats in there. Even though it may not be the most efficient thing for them to do, but in the end, the inception of the user actually seeing that, oh, there's also Uber Eats, I never heard of them, right? Rather than seeing a competitor is much more beneficial, right? And we have to keep that position no matter what. So
how does like the paid media opportunities, how do they compare to like the other platforms, the more established platforms that that are out there?
Paid media opportunities in terms
like on the App Store.
Well, they're pretty young in there, right? They just launched a few months ago, right? So, in terms of transparency, there's lack of it, quite a bit, right? So we're actually kind of going back into our old days where you're trying to figure out what's going on. So I would say, the more interesting piece of it is actually how it's being approached. Is actually that you're trying to figure out the overlaps between your app and other apps. And that's where the non-brand piece of it is, right? Because the brand piece is pretty obvious. But the non-brand piece is figuring out that overlap with other apps. And was that app installed before yours, right? Or is that app compete? So for example, let's say international calls, right? Apps, those are pretty popular with Uber drivers. But are they installed before the Uber driver becomes an Uber driver, right? So figuring that out and understanding at what point do we actually target that user in the App Store is actually, that's the harder piece for us. But it's pretty cool that we're approaching audiences from their app usage perspective and not like the usual demographics or intent searches, right?
Right on. So you said you wanted to talk about Google's Universal App Campaigns a little bit. So what is this program? How is Uber benefiting from it? And you want to...
Yeah. So UAC, we've been actually, working with Google on the UAC side for quite a while in terms of when it was actually alpha and beta. I don't know how many use UAC here. Obviously, it's quite a sophisticated program. We enjoy the AI aspect of it. And that one I can truly say AI versus like, some algorithmic rules that are waterfall rules. This is one actually will follow the user across Google's universe and really enter auctions at individual levels, depending on when is the right time to actually serve the ad, right? So obviously it takes all of that into consideration, incrementality and all of those things. And we've been working very closely with them in terms of understanding what kind of data we feed the AI and what is the best way of getting more efficient traffic out of it without actually cutting the volume, right? Because that's constantly kind of a dilemma of a digital marketer is like, hey, is it the volume or is it the efficiency? Ideally, you want to do both, right? And that's kind of what we've been really working on the UAC side. And obviously, driving for more transparency. Clearly, when you just switch something on like that, it's also pretty dangerous, especially when you don't have full transparency into it, what it's actually doing. And there's pros and cons to it, where it's like a lot of people, engineers will tell you, obviously, not even just Google, any AI engineer will tell you, well, we don't want you tweaking with it, right? We just want you to give it data, and it will make all of its own decisions. That's usually why the lack of transparency, right? But I think there's a good balance, again, in that one as well, is where you understand what data is the most important to you, and you as a human being, what would you kind of, looking at your data, what are your most important audiences? What would you like to see more of, right? And feed that static data to the AI where it can actually learn on its own and progress, right? Versus just having if-then logic or anything like that.
So from working with all these programs, are you learning anything particularly like interesting or surprising about your audiences?
Yeah, well, it's not quite surprising, but yeah, we've been seeing a lot of interesting things in terms of obviously kind of the way weather affects food delivery. Yeah, it's pretty. You think like it's obvious, but it's just insane how you look at a rainy Monday, what it can do to orders, right, on Uber Eats.
Does it depend on the region?
Yeah,
I would imagine.
Definitely.
Cool. So we talked a little bit about AI on the Google side, and you bringing data to the Google platform. But how is Uber planning to incorporate AI and machine learning into its own universe? And how's AI sort of reinforcing search and vice versa?
Yeah. So clearly on the product side, we have it figured out pretty well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people wouldn't be using us. But on the marketing side, it's been a little more from a perspective, we don't want to reinvent the AI technology for marketing. There's a lot of third parties out there who can work with us, and we're focusing more on the aspect of data again, and really understanding what kind of data we share with our partners, and help them figure out where our next audience is, and really adapting from different market to different market. That's really hard for us, obviously. Being in so many countries, where US, for example, where it's a more mature market, how do you get to that, higher LTV user? And there's still people, right, who still think that Uber is just a taxi company or something, right? So we're trying to get to all of those people, but at the same time, in the less mature markets, it's more growth driven. So a lot of different goals for different AIs, right? To understand, like, hey, this is not the same as US. We need you to do something different here. So we're really focusing on that aspect of data flow into the technology itself.
And how would you rate how you're doing on the understanding and interpreting of the data that you collect? Are you there yet? Are you doing well?
That's, I hope our analytics department's not listening, but
okay.
No, but I think we do it really, I think we do it pretty well, considering Uber Eats is so young as a company, so considering how much progress we've made in understanding the audiences and how we go after them, I think we're doing amazingly well.
Great.
But again, having all that data does help us quite a bit.
Absolutely. And my last question for me before we open up to the audience, what is Uber's biggest marketing challenge in your opinion?
Yeah, the biggest marketing challenge I would say for us is actually really becoming that step in everyone's life where Uber is not really a choice of alternative choice or anything like that. It's an kind of automated choice in your subconscious where you don't, when you think of getting anywhere, you think of Uber right away, right? And really keeping up with the trends of the consumer is really important when you're that lifestyle, right? So wherever the voice searches take us or anything else or any new platforms, we have to be there first no matter what, right? We always have to be there. It doesn't matter what the adoption rate is, and I'm sure you've seen like Uber was one of the first ones on the Echo and all of that stuff, right? It's so important for us to be there because we're that lifestyle choice and we want to be that brand where we're so accessible and it's so easy for you to kind of even not have to think about us. Whereas
Right.
like, I just want to get to the restaurant, and you automatically just think of Uber, right?
And that brings up another question I forgot to ask you, which is voice and that kind of AI technology. So what are you learning from your testing with that? Are people really using it a lot and using it all the time?
I think
So
we're
we call for it?
seeing same kind of adoption rate as we have, kind of with e-commerce. So as people order things via voice, or it's easier for us to get users used to it because, again, it's not, the risk is pretty low. So it's not, you're not going to order a 55-inch TV on accident, right? But it's going to be, you're pretty comfortable that you know what the price is going to be, usually for Uber, right, from one point A to point B. So we've definitely seen it grow, and hopefully we continue to see that behavior grow, right?
Nice. Okay, great. All right. So any questions from the floor here? No? Not one question for Alex? All right.
I was worried.
Oh, wait, one in front. Kevin's coming with the mic. So yeah, just to remind you, when you do ask a question, please stand and tell us who you are and where you work. I know Steve has already done this, but just do it again if you don't mind. Thank you, Steve.
Hi, Steve Gibson from Canvas. How much time and effort do you concentrate on conquesting, or just on your competition?
Good question. So we don't do as much of conquesting, being the #1 player. Pretty much every market is what actually usually happens to us, that people usually try to piggyback off of us quite a bit. So that's where actually the bigger issue comes into play. For someone, it's much easier for someone to start bidding against Uber keywords and drive up our CPCs. And considering our volumes, obviously, that's usually hurts us more than if I retaliated and started bidding on someone else's keywords, right? Like, they're not going to care as much. So we try to protect ourselves as much as possible from these types of situations. Anywhere from, we started kind of policing our brand a lot more. So we don't allow, affiliate partners or referral partners, anyone like that, to use our brand keywords or bid on them. So it's been more around that, protecting that auction as much as possible. And then getting to a point where we've, we just don't allow competition to really show up. That's where we throw in all of our other brands, right? And that's where we throw in Uber Eats to show up, or Uber Freight even, So to us, it's not really, sometimes it's worth to take that spot away from competition and pay a little more to have one of our other brands show up in there. So that's kind of how we've been dealing with it.
Which of the newer brands are you most excited about?
Well, I don't know if you've seen, there's a video on YouTube about how hovercrafts, how these flying Ubers are coming sooner than you think.
Wow.
Yeah, flying Ubers. I'm very excited about that one. I don't know what sooner than you think means.
Wow.
But we'll see.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. All right. I guess if there's no more questions, round of applause for Alex, please. Thanks, guys.